What's going on, everybody? I'm back with another video. This video is going to be looking at how Italy progressed past Spain to the European Championship final. But before we start, check out my book. It's online, and check out my blog. I'm going to try and release a blog article on Spain's offensive organization, as they did some really cool things that I won't be able to get to in this video. So check out my blog and my book. Both have links in the description below, so be sure to check those two things out. Like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, but let's get right into it. So Spain in possession was the dominant phase of the match, with Italy in their defensive organization phase. Spain started building from the back using their two central defenders alongside their goalkeeper. They would then have their fullbacks in the wide areas and have their midfield three divided among the central three corridors, and we'll start to see a right half space overload with Koke's vertical mobility. But how Italy went about stopping this was with an asymmetric front three. They had Insigne pressing narrow to create access to the central defender. They had an off-centered forward to then press the weak side central defender from Insigne, and then the right winger would then press the usual right fullback. This would create an asymmetric defensive setup using man orientation on their back line, allowing then just their midfielders to match up in a more man-oriented fashion, as we see here. So looking at it from a bird's eye view now, tactical cam, we have our back four that's defending in numerical equality, and what this does is it can create some problems if the space isn't covered slightly, but with experienced defenders like Bonucci and Chiellini, they were able to get away with it. So we have our two central defenders jumping to one, a false nine, and then two making up for the asymmetry started by Insigne pressing the first line of the build-up, and then having our fullback jump to then eliminate the free player of Spain's fullbacks, and then this left the right fullback to cover the left winger of Spain, as is expected in most situations. But then the midfield man orientation, we have here three midfielders, Jorginho being the holding midfielder playing the deepest, and now we have one of the central defenders of Italy jumping into the midfield, almost creating a diamond to match up with Spain's offensive setup as well. And we see our front three providing asymmetry in the defensive phase to use a man-oriented press to limit the use of a free man, which is something that Spain try and do really often. And just by Italy's setup, we can tell they're looking to press the ball into this corner of the field, into an inefficient area, and lining up to then press the fullback in a wide area as well. So we see this by the diagonal compactness forming between the first and second line of buildup. But in their offensive phase, as we talked about, they used a right half space overload in possession, with Koke dropping deeper to then have their players playing the central forward position drop more towards the right half space, creating almost a diamond or an asymmetric box for Spain's starting positions in their initial build-up in their offensive phase. The wingers would stay wide, looking to disconnect the defense of Italy, as if they came narrow, they would probably allow Italy to maintain a more narrow, structured defensive line. So by separating their wingers and almost looking to isolate them, it allowed them to use space in behind, or at least attempt to create this space. So then the fullbacks stayed wide in the initial phase as well, to try and again create a numerical superiority by getting the first line of Italy to then jump and find the free man. So we can see here in the second half, we see the same setup as well, with Morata coming on the field. It changed a little bit. They then had a central forward to then have a player who's then not as equipped to drop into a false nine position or occupy spaces between the lines in the half space. Morata is not this type of player. So here we see a more slight staggering of Koke and Sergio Busquets, allowing then the forward to come into the right half space, again creating this right half space overload, with the wingers isolating themselves higher up the field, pinning two Italian defenders back, but breaking the connections within their defensive line. And we can even see now both central defenders jumping for Italy, creating a lot of space in behind, but Spain without the range of passing to execute an action that would take advantage of this space. We still see the staple of asymmetry in their first line, looking to force the ball into a wide area or in the corner of Spain's own half. Spain moving into the midfield third used deeper fullbacks, which would then use their late runs when the wingers inverted into dangerous spaces. The fullbacks would then advance late to then access the space, so when the ball was delivered, they'd already be moving dynamically. Koke and Sergio Busquets played as a double pivot, but Koke was very flexible in his vertical positioning, often advancing, leaving Busquets as the lone pivot, where he flourished when he was able to get on the ball, facing forward with the half turn and finding a player between the lines. Italy went with a 5-man midfield, and we just see one of the midfielders off our screen here to the lower part of the screen. And with the 5 midfielders and the 1 forward, they really look to limit the space between the lines. The wide midfielders of the central midfield 3, they look to create a man-oriented defensive strategy, which consisted of them marking the advanced players with their cover shadows between the lines, maintaining a high level of compactness and limiting the availability of Sergio Busquets to then find these passing angles, especially the diagonal ones, into the half spaces from a central position. So here we are, Italy's 4-5-1, and now we see all 5 midfielders and the one who is deeper just off our screen marking a player in the half space, as we said was a common trend. And with overload, as long as there was a +1 numerical superiority, or even if there was a 1-1 numerical equality in the defensive line, Italy were okay with it, just so long as they weren't overloaded in central positions. So their 4-5-1 worked quite well, and with their forward using their cover shadow to eliminate the option of one of the holding midfielders when Koke would drop deeper. They had plenty of numbers in central areas to deal with Spain, although Spain's movement did look quite efficient, and I was impressed with some of the concepts they applied, even though I'm not a fan of a back 4 using deep fullbacks on both sides with wide wingers initially. But I was quite impressed with Spain's rotations. Just I think rest defense-wise, they could tighten up a few things and be a little more deliberate at times with some decision-making tweaks in the final third. But their initial setup was very interesting. I know they have vertical alignment and dual width on both sides, which allowed these players to make narrow runs or even come deeper into the half space, allowed very fluid structure and a lot of mobility from their attacking players to occupy different spaces between Italy's defensive line. So here we are, a picture of Italy's compactness in their 4-5-1, and typically a staple for Italian teams is a very organized defensive block, as we see here, limiting the space between the lines and not having to use man orientation when they can use concepts like the cover shadow to block passes and create access on the ball. One thing from Spain they did to try and counter this was they did have Laporte many times jump with the ball to dribble and try and progress to try and pull out a midfielder of Italy, but a lot of times it was just the central forward who would then go and press. But when it was a midfielder, one of these midfielders could be sucked out, and then all this space would be left in between the lines and be able to be exploited by Spain. The biggest threat came when Busquets got on the ball in the central of the field and was able to turn and had the ability to look for players in advanced positions, whether that be the half space or the central corridor. But when he got into this position, the first line of press was broken from Italy, and Busquets had the time to turn. Because from here, with his ability to find a pass and the abundance of passing options they had forward and around Busquets in diagonal positions especially, he was virtually always able to pick a pass, a forward pass too, because when the ball was lost, the central 3 players of Italy had to narrow their shape, solidify the center of the field, and this would often lead to half space progression or or best case scenario for Italy, progression via the wide area, which still isn't great, but these areas of Busquets getting on the ball as the holding midfielder past the first line in front of the second line became very dangerous when he was in the central corridor. Italy in their build-up, Donnarumma split Chiellini and Bonucci, and their fullbacks played in the wide area as well. Similarly to Spain, they had a similar 4-3-3 structure initially with their forward dropping back, but with their forward dropping back, there was more to play a more direct option or initiate a third man movement. From Spain, we had our two wingers invert to press the central defenders and had our most central attacking player take care of the holding midfielder of Italy, limiting the influence Jorginho had on the match, and this slowed the pace and made Italy play very direct early on in the game, which led to a lot of ball recoveries for Spain in Italy's defensive third or initial phase of build-up. We see Italy's midfield three matched up man for man by Spain's man-oriented press with their midfield three, and Spain even creating numerical superiority in the midfield areas by advancing and narrowing their fullbacks and or their winger. So by having these players start in more central positions, they're able to block entry balls into the first line or the last line of attack for Italy, but while still maintaining the ability to jump into wide areas and press the Italian team if they did try and play around the Spain defensive block. Again, Spain defending with numerical equality, as has been a trend lately in the Euros, and something that I've noticed, something pretty interesting happening with teams being confident playing 3v3 typically in the last line of defense. And the last picture I just wanted to show, Italy in their low block defensively, playing their 4-5-1 with two central defenders and a 5-man midfield in front of them with 3 central midfielders to then block the central corridors, and how Spain looked to do this. So as we said before, Laporte looks to jump with possession of the ball, and the ball typically traveled through either Busquets or Laporte in the central area or in the half space using Laporte's left foot, and Spain looked to occupy advanced areas with 3 advanced options, each in a central corridor, trying to create strong passing connections in these advanced areas while maintaining their space of cooperation as their perimeter of their structure, stretching wide but not using the full width of the field as a default. They're trying to use minimum width to then close down the space Italy has in transition. So that's the analysis, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.